Hello. Uh, Can you hear me, Josiah? Perfect. Thumbs up.
See?
See, we have a little plush looking background now.
Yeah, it's been like that for a couple of months.
Okay.
If
Well,
you hate me, you don't give a fuck about me or what's going on in my life. It's
no,
okay.
just Josiah, not your background. I'm talking about the show's background. Instead of just a black screen, we've got this color wave looking thing.
It's exactly what I was talking about.
Okay. Well, I don't believe you. It has
Nor
not been that
should
way
you.
for months.
Nor should you.
Yeah,
It's not been. It's been like that for about
that's what I
1
thought.
week. It's been 1 week since you looked at me.
That's what I
It's a
thought. See,
90s song.
I'm paying very close attention. Okay, very close.
I
Also,
guess.
Josiah, your lights aren't on in the background.
No, I don't have them
They're off.
connected.
Okay, seems like a mistake.
No, they're all charging right now.
Can
Wait,
you
your
hear
lights
me?
are. We can't be skill. Your lights are on
Okay.
a battery. They're not just like plugged into an outlet.
No, because then the wires would be exposed. I haven't figured a way to do that. So no, unfortunately, they
Interesting.
are. Yeah, they are Bluetooth
Okay.
powered, rechargeable
Curious.
lights.
Okay.
When you're as busy as I am, you don't have the time to like deal with all that nonsense.
How busy
I guess
are you,
so.
Josiah?
Pretty
6
bad.
videos a day.
Pretty
A
bad.
day,
And
Pisco.
I'm on, and it's like it's spiritually, it's soul crushing. Like today was just like
It's become a job.
Killing it.
no, it's been no, it's not. I feel like it is obviously more financially rewarding than any job I've ever had, and I'm passionate about it. But like every other job I've ever had has not been spiritually crushing. But when you're inundated in 2024 politics in the United States, that's like I admire the zen of somebody like David Pakman who doesn't seem to like have an intense emotional investment in the outcome of elections. But
Maybe he's
dude,
just a sociopath, Josiah.
he might well be.
He might
I've
just
never
not
met the
feel
man
emotion
personally.
like a normal person.
It's
So,
possible. It's a
you
colossal
know,
advantage I feel in this space.
yeah, he's from Argentina. I don't know.
I don't know what that means. Isn't that the guy where Malay? Isn't he the president of Argentina? Malay.
Yeah, that's true.
My understanding was his whole thing of like reducing the government by 90% or whatever the fuck his policy was is not going particularly well.
No.
Surprisingly enough, it's not going too well when they elected an anarcho-capitalist to be their president. But honestly, I mean, he's not doing nearly as badly as I thought he would. I mean, this is just another example of um of like a very, very radical politician immediately taking office and moderating on almost everything. Like he's like an anarcho-capitalist, but he's basically governing as sort of your classic center right Latin American politician. So in many ways, at least, I
What
mean,
is that
he's
supposed to mean, Latin American?
well, I mean, cutting some benefits, but not really doing super duper crazy deep austerity, and certainly not addressing. I mean, we'll see how things go in the long term, but I mean, 50+% poverty rates doesn't seem like an optimal way to structure a economic recovery. But what do I know? What do I know as a filthy
Well,
sock dem? Yeah,
it's not like your name is Econo Boy, suggesting
that's
that
true.
you have a mastery of all things. Like you got to remember,
Yeah.
like we're like the
Economist.
Avengers, yeah, and you're like the Thor of the economy, and Pisco is like
Mhm.
he's like the Hulk of the law, and Hutch and I'm sure we offer something. We're like Hawkeye.
Like Black Widow.
Whoa! You guys are superheroes too.
I think I'm more like Hulk, but
Yeah.
Black Widow is a superhero.
Well,
I don't
you're
know why
definitely.
you're
I think you're the
demeaning
tallest
her.
one. You're 6'4". How
I'm
tall are?
6.
And how tall are you, Econo Boy?
I'm 6'1", but
No
Hutch.
way.
I mean,
Well,
what?
then
I'm the
I am
short one?
definitely.
I'm the
I'm
short one?
definitely Black Widow. No, I'm the short one. I'm Black Widow. I'm 5'8". I am Black
You're
Widow.
5'8"?
Yeah.
You have a little bit of taller energy than I thought you were
Thank
like
you.
5'10".
No.
Hold on, have we-
5'10"? Stop it.
have we
Stop
Wait,
it.
Hutch, are you really
confirmed-
6'4"?
That's exactly right.
No, I'm
Have we confirmed it that Hutch is 6'4"?
I met him in person. I was like right up to his navel.
No,
No,
but
I'm
if you,
serious.
Josiah, if you're a shorty, guy, then
what?
obviously, like, 6'4",
You just
6'1",
call me shorty.
Shorty?
what's the big
I'm
deal?
6'3". I'm 6'3" for the record. I'm 6'3".
6'3". Okay.
Okay, I see.
So I think Hutch is Hulk. I can be Captain America because I feel like I'm scrappy. I don't give up. What about
Robert
Captain
Downey
America?
Jr. is 5'8", I'm pretty sure, so I'll be Iron Man. How about that?
He's 5'8".
He is.
Wow.
Yeah,
Short
he
guy.
is.
He also has the most clout, so that tracks as
True.
well.
That wouldn't be true then, because you just got us a big interview tomorrow, and that was on your efforts, not mine.
It just fell on my doorstep. Is what happened there.
As a reminder, tomorrow, Hutch and I are squaring off with Kyle Kalinske and Crystal Ball.
Whoa!
I'm sure it's going to
We
be.
can't live stream it. We cannot live stream it.
Yeah,
just so I know. Yeah,
it won't be.
Yeah.
It won't be.
Are you guys going to get a concurrent recording?
Yeah. We can record and post on our channels, but we have to wait a couple days because they want to do like exclusive stuff for their Substack.
Wow!
Yeah.
So they literally wrote a contract. These communists, they're all about markets and contracts when it suits them.
No,
Sure,
it's more of a handshake kind of deal.
Gentleman's agreement.
Yeah. No,
How
congratulations.
you
That's awesome.
We had our hippy dippy debate. How'd you
That was
guys?
good.
We didn't round up.
Oh,
how do you guys think we did?
I think we killed it. I mean, it's one of those things where I wish the topic was just strictly Kamala v. Trump, because there's just so much packed in there. And I love the Walls JD Vance conversation, but like when it was getting into the weeds on foreign policy, not that I don't think that shit matters, but I think that that's less of our focus, and that's less of our primary issues as selfish, privileged Americans, who are more concerned with like what's going on in here domestically. But yeah, I think that, I think we're honestly, especially having done this with you guys, like this has been the synergy I think been created. I think it's an unstoppable team. Let me say this. I would put Live and Learn up against any four conservatives, and I think we would at least not get totally blown out of the water.
I want to say something, and no disrespect to Pisco and Josiah. I think you're both very strong debaters. Pisco, you get real aggressive sometimes. I like that energy. Econo Boy, you, sir,
well done.
I think you are crazy good at debates. And I was texting Josiah about it. You hide your power level because you're such a mild-mannered guy, but you are so sharp in that kind of a format. So I just want to throw
it was really noticeable, and we all appreciated it.
Yeah, my favorite part was when he told Kevin to shut the fuck up. Nobody wants to talk. Nobody wants to hear from you. But he didn't even raise his voice doing it. He did it in his like very chill Econo Boy style.
Like, how did a communist sneak?
He wasn't always a communist.
I was gonna say, for those listening that don't know who we're talking about, so on Hippy Dippy, I guess the theory of the debate was for center left people versus for center right wing people, and Hippy Dippy, they recruited Kevin to be part of the sort of right wing team. And I don't know. I don't think this was unbeknownst to Dylan. Maybe, Dylan, he's a WWE guy. He wants to throw in a little chaos. Yeah. So Kevin Castley is this guy who, my familiarity with him began about a couple years ago when he was a right-leaning liberal hawk, like wanted to invade every Middle Eastern country, kind of a Democrat, but very like almost like Clinton Democrat, very right-wing Democrat guy. But then some sort of process happened in the last 2 years where now he's a like straight up just communist, right? Like, like I don't know what happened. But I don't know. I can't remember. I think it was Destiny who said it's always curious when people go from basically like one niche ideology to another one. Like they don't moderate into a mainstream thing. They just go from like it's like a guy going from being a Nazi to being like a tanky. It's like, that's weird. Like it's almost like more of a comment on your mindset than actually maybe a genuine political development. But I don't know. I mean, Kevin, he may have just started reading Marx and just took off on that train or something. I'm not sure what happened, but he was a real interesting guy to debate with. But thanks for the compliments, guys. Yeah, I try to do. The trick is to have a lot of anxiety and feel like you're going to do terribly in the debate. So it forces you to do a lot of research ahead of time, 95% of which you won't even end up using, you know?
Bro,
won't
you
even use
hide it so well. Like Josiah said the same thing about me because I get the same way. Sometimes with debates, I can get really anxious. It's kind of like with public speaking. I don't know if you guys have done public speaking, but in my experience, usually once you get past like the first 3 minutes, then I actually kind of like it. Like it's exciting, it's fun.
Yeah.
But the build up to that moment, and then the first like 3 minutes, I'm usually pretty nervous. I would not have guessed you were anxious because you seem
I appeared on someone's stream called Nonfon. He's like a very small streamer, and I think that one thing that helps with my anxiety during debates, at least partly is doing a lot of research, but then also part of it is, and I mentioned this in the stream talking to Nonfon, like I legitimately speaking, I've spoken to anti-Trump Republicans that I cannot say this about. I've spoken to anarcho-capitalists that I can't say this about. All these kinds. I've never spoken, ever spoken to a Trump Republican, and I've taken away from that conversation, wow, that guy seems to know a lot about policy. Like, it's never happened. They're batting 0%. So one thing that helps my anxiety during debates is just the sort of gradual or very quick realization of like, man, these guys, they just really haven't looked into these things.
right. Yeah.
The depth is very, very shallow. And I don't know. I mean, and certainly on some topics, I'm not going to be as prepared to discuss them, like the legal topics that we talked about or things like that. And even with the immigration topic, it was part of the economics section, but really it was almost more of a legal discussion of like, oh, what's technically legal and what can we do or not do. And they weren't really, it didn't seem like they were as eager to actually have an economics discussion about that issue. But yeah, I don't know. They seemed pretty rough around the edges, but I don't know. Maybe Dylan can recruit some more worthy right wing adversaries.
It's one of those things where, in hindsight, I mean, I would have been interested, I think, to see, because Lactoid's no dummy. He's a sharp guy. I think Cam Higbee, he seems like a smart guy too. It's just unfortunate. I think like a lot of these people, when the facts are not on your side, it creates a deficit that you really can't overcome. I've said it before, but I think like being a MAGA Republican in 2024, even the best MAGA Republican, it's like being the world's smartest flat earther. It's just like you're not going to be able to make a persuasive case based on the facts. And so I think that's kind of the disadvantage there. Obviously, Kevin intermittently arguing with them, nearly as often as he argued with us. That certainly didn't help either. So it would be interesting if somebody like, Dylan could get whatever the closest thing to a conservative A team in this space, but I don't even know what that would look like or who would be involved. But yeah, I had a really good time. It was fun.
On the flip side of that, Crystal and Kyle are both very sharp. Like I've actually spent a little bit of time watching, because I don't watch a ton of their content. It's like the spicy clips that come up on my radar. But I spent a decent amount of time watching both of their videos recently, and honestly, they're both impressive. Like I don't like the points that they make a lot of the times, and we can get into that. It's supposed to be framed as a discussion, not a debate. So like, I'm not expecting like a big blood sport kind of a situation. But
and I forget, Hutch, remind me of the audience. There was like a tweet that got sent out. How did this actually come about, this conversation?
Kyle made a video talking about how Kamala is making a mistake by touting the endorsement from Liz Cheney. And I made a video sort of offering my own insight. I've ranted on Kyle on my stream before and gone super hard. But for this video, I made it a point to like, I'm not going to do any ad homs. I'm just going to like talk about the points and the ideas. And so I went actually like, it was very tame. I did say that I think he has bad instincts. In retrospect, I think I wish I would have said he has bad instincts sometimes. So we can get into that a little bit more tomorrow. But he reached out in a comment on the video and then reached out in a tweet asking if I wanted to come on to Crystal and Kyle. I said I would feel more comfortable instead of like a 2v1 situation if Josiah came on with me. Because we had experience doing stuff at the Trump thing and whatever.
Yeah.
So that's going to happen tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. my time, which is great.
I can't wait to watch you guys in action.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because I don't know where Kyle is with a lot of this. Like, I do watch a lot of Secular Talk because he uploads multiple times a day too. I think he's
an OG.
Yeah, I think he has the Pac-Man style where he like records a continuous stream and then like separate. Like I don't know if he streams it because I've actually never seen him go live per se.
He doesn't. No, he does like what you do, where you do the it's
Yeah,
the
but see,
same.
so yeah, but I think he does it like Pac-Man, where it's one continuous like hour long, and then he breaks it up because I don't even do that. Like I'll do maybe 2 videos back to back, and then go research for like 45 minutes or an hour, go to the gym or something, then come back and do 2 more. But I watch a fair bit of his content. He has been very praiseworthy of Destiny recently. Number one, I mean, consistently. Number two, he's obviously been glazing to some extent Vice President Harris and certainly Governor Walz. And he's definitely like, if you look at his content, I think he swings even more towards picking on Republicans and Trump and MAGA.
No, he definitely does. Yeah.
Yeah. Then I see from Crystal's content, but I don't watch Breaking Points nearly as often. I don't even know if I'm subscribed to that particular channel. So
well, to my knowledge, they both endorse Stein, and I don't think either of them intend to vote for Kamala.
Really?
I know she has endorsed Stein, but I did not know that he did. And that'll be that'll be the mission.
Hold on, I'll look it up. You guys talk.
Last I heard from Kyle, he endorses the strategic third-party voter strategy, where if you're in a non-swing state, yeah, you vote for the third party. But if your vote actually matters, then you should vote, for the Democrats or the left.
Does he say that? Does he actually say that?
That's the last I heard. This might be seriously out of date.
Okay,
but no, I mean, but he's
5 months ago on Bosch's subreddit. Crystal and Kyle endorse Jill Stein for 2024.
But to be fair, that was when President Biden was the nominee, right? So like the fact that Kamala Harris is the nominee now and she has Governor Walz as a running mate, that may have swung Kyle. I think Crystal is still Jill Stein, though.
I mean, this is an answer or this is a question you guys could just ask. Like I think that this does speak to political instincts, because I think that the political instincts for anybody who votes for Jill Stein cannot be called good. Like you can't call those political
if the goal is to win. If the goal is to win, and
well, not just win, but like if the goal is to just do good politics, like good for people politics. There's truly not a strong argument pretty much ever in history for voting for the Green Party, at least in America, right? If you live in a multi-party democracy, of course it can make sense to vote green, but we don't, right? We live in a 2-party democracy. So,
but then you should, if you guys are curious enough, watch her interview, Breaking Point's interview with Jill Stein from, I think it's either 12 days ago or 2 days ago. She was asking all the right questions. And she was basically, if you didn't know that she had endorsed Stein, you would think that she was supporting Kamala, because she was with her questioning. She was sort of guiding the Stein and the viewer to the inescapable conclusion that, Kamala is the better candidate. So in terms of like her skills on camera, her skills as an interviewer, she's actually quite sharp. And so I'm trying to do a lot of homework and make sure I'm prepared for this conversation.
Yeah. I think it'll be a pretty good conversation. I don't expect it to be particularly heated. The Gaza stuff, obviously, that is, if not their single issue vote, then certainly it seems to me to be their primary concern. And
it'll come up.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And it just, for me, it comes down to, even if you're a single issue voter with respect to Gaza, the people who are perpetrating the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the Likud government and Netanyahu and Itamar Ben-Gvir, they've made it abundantly clear that they think there's a meaningful difference between Trump and Kamala there. So it would seem to me that if you wanted to thwart what's going on in Gaza, you would want to deny Netanyahu and Itamar Ben-Gvir their preferred candidate for the presidency, for no other reason than that.
Is there a good answer to that? I haven't heard one.
I've not heard one either, so it will be interesting. And besides which, I'm not convinced to, the other thing I hear is it'll teach Democrats a lesson. I've seen no evidence of that. I think we've seen evidence to the contrary. Moreover, Democrats are people too. And I think that people who deliberately vote against Kamala Harris, or choose not to vote for her, I should say, they either vote for Trump, they vote for a third party, or they just stay on the couch. It's some sort of an objection to any sort of policy. I think you could expect, whether you like it or not, whether you think it's wrong or right, that there will be some sense of bitterness. And again, because politicians are people, and so they obviously they have to win votes. And if you've made it clear that they're less likely to get your vote, they're going to go seek that vote elsewhere. And it just seems like it's going to be a natural sliding scale towards the right.
Well, relative to that, relevant to that point, there was some really interesting news that came out today where Biden, to my knowledge, you guys probably read up on it more than I did, signaled an openness to an arms embargo if Israel doesn't take more steps to make sure that Palestinian civilians aren't being killed. The pushback that I saw against that was, well, he's talking about doing it after the election. Why isn't he doing it now? That's one way to look at it. If you're really passionate about the issue, I understand, especially if you have like family in the region. I totally understand. I get that. But the evidence is right there that the Democratic Party can be moved on a number of issues. I mean, we saw this historically throughout Biden's time in office, regardless of the stuff in Gaza, like on student loan debt forgiveness, for example, was one issue that he moved left on. But it's an indication that, you know, pressure campaigns can work actually, and that's like you can successfully push the leader of the party in a direction that you want to go. And so if you wanted to look at it like, well, he's not doing it now, so therefore it's not good enough, so therefore I can't support the Kamala thing, I think that's just the wrong way to look at it. I think the right way to look at it is to see that the Democratic Party is not going to be what a lot of leftists and self-described socialists or progressives want it to be, but you can move them. And there's no opportunity to do that if Donald Trump wins.
I'd be interested to hear what Econoboy and Pisco have to say about this while we're workshopping this, because like I hear you, and I will say like my first objection is, or my first response is, I really don't know to what extent Biden is movable on Israel. And again, this is not my area of expertise. I'm just going based on, you know, what little I've read and what little I've heard, because I'm so much more focused on domestic issues. First, let me just say again, there's no doubt that Biden is still preferable to Trump on Gaza. Set Harris aside, Biden himself, whatever your objections are to him, again, Netanyahu and Ben Gvir have made it clear that even when Biden was the nominee, they felt that they would get more active participation or less resistance from Trump. So they thought that Trump was a meaningfully preferred candidate. But number two, Biden isn't the nominee. So I think that that's one way to step aside from this. But I will say, I'm personally not going to hang too much on, well, Biden for the umpteenth time is threatening to impose some sort of sanction on Israel, because unless I'm mistaken, I don't think these things have meaningfully manifested. And
it's toothless right now, Josiah. And my response to that is essentially, and I'm going to give you guys some real talk right now.
Yeah.
This is just my take. Who am I? I'm just someone looking at it. And in my mind, I'm not trying to make reasonable conclusions, but you could disagree. My mind is that Israel and Netanyahu actually do have a lot of leverage right now in this moment, especially over the Democrats. And they don't really need any more than they have with the Republicans. But essentially, Jewish Americans are one of the Democrats' major constituencies. It is a major fracture in the party in terms of the left wing and like the anti-colonialists left versus the pro-Israel, more establishment Democrat wing of the party. And Netanyahu knows that. And Biden, his threats are kind of toothless and meaningless because he doesn't have any leverage himself. He's kind of a lame duck president at this point. And they're vulnerable. If Biden comes out stronger against Netanyahu, if Biden undermines, says, hey, we might see we're about to do an embargo against Israel, what's going to happen? Immediately you have Fetterman condemning that action. Fetterman's not going to be campaigning as much for Kamala Harris. You're putting Kamala Harris in a bind. And this is just me giving you real talk right now.
There's a political consequence to that. That's an incumbent senator from perhaps the most important swing state in the country, Pennsylvania, which is already looking like a coin flip.
Yeah,
and I'll also say to your point, well, I was just going to say to your point, just to reinforce it. So Hassan was on Pod Save America recently, and he had a conversation with John Favreau. And even Favreau, to the extent that Favreau pushed back at all on Hassan's talking points, he was like, listen, the people who are involved in the Harris campaign, yes, you make a very good point about potentially alienating Arab American and Muslim voters. However, there's also a concurrent concern about alienating Jewish American voters, because to your point, it's for every one person who, I mean, I don't even know if I want to phrase it this way, but like the party is much more divided on support for Israel compared to the Republicans.
There's nuance there, and I feel like a lot of the times, I feel like I hear it a lot from from people like Crystal Ball and Brianna Joy Gray, I hear, it's like 80% of the country wants a ceasefire. That does not tell the whole story. Like when you get into more granular detail, when these pollsters are asking questions, then all of a sudden you get a really different picture. And to my knowledge, I think it's like the vast majority of the country wants a ceasefire only after Israel has their hostages back. And it's still like, 75 to 80% of Israel of Americans support Israel over Hamas in this war. If you ask somebody off the street, maybe a normie voter that low info, doesn't really have a lot of information or whatever, doesn't have a lot of context, isn't really paying attention to the conflict, like, hey, do you want a ceasefire in this conflict? Most people are just going to say that instinctually because they don't want to see any fighting anywhere. But again, once you get into the specifics of how they ask the question, you get totally different answers. And it's not as clear cut as they think, where it's like they seem to think that if Biden and Harris tomorrow announced an arms embargo and just, severed our alliance with that country, that her points would shoot up 10 points and she'd be just dominating Trump. And I haven't seen any evidence of that.
I mean, I think that I agree with, I think it was Josiah who said that the Democrats are kind of in a bind here. You can also just look at the distribution of Muslim and Jewish people in the country and see that it's like very clearly a bind, right? So like, for instance, like the Jewish population in certain swing states is bigger than the Muslim population in certain swing states, but then the reverse is true in other swing states like Michigan.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's just like clearly not, it's clear that it's not clear what the correct like political calculus is. My instinct on this would be that, and I know that, for instance, like some really high percentage of Jewish voters are Democrats, but also a really high percentage of Jewish voters are very sympathetic to Israel and like the causes of Israel and things like that. But my instinct is that the Muslim voters of America are basically feel the exact opposite, but also that Muslim voters are much more, how do I put this? Like much more fervent in their beliefs on this, and they're much more willing to prioritize that as an issue over Jewish voters. Given that, I think that it probably is why we see the Biden administration being a bit more responsive to the uncommitted movement and things like that. I don't think they've been as responsive as they probably should from a political calculus point of view. Fetterman, he is such a bizarre person in American politics at this point in his career, where he started out as this sort of almost like this like proto Dan Osborne type character, where it's like, this is how you can win working class white people back. A guy like Fetterman, for various reasons or whatever, he could literally barely speak when he won his Senate election because of his recent stroke. Right. But he's gotten a lot better since then. It's just to say that like his cult of personality seemed really strong and his like style of campaigning seemed really strong. But then after taking office, he's kind of seemingly maintained a lot of his progressive bona fides. But he's become totally pro-Israel to the point that it's almost distracting of his broader record, which is very bizarre. But overall, it is a difficult issue. I think that my instincts, if I was the president, would be the Israeli prime minister doesn't tell me what to do. And I think that Netanyahu, he's really become, I would say, he's become bold to the point that I think it's important to almost like just put him in his place. Like you can't just come to America and start lobbying American politicians against what the U.S. State Department says. You're the prime minister of Israel. It's totally inappropriate for you to be meeting with oppositional candidates. It's totally inappropriate for you to be back channeling with oppositional candidates. We don't tolerate that. It doesn't matter what your strategic position is. That's not good. That's not a good precedent to set, that basically foreign actors can come into this country and just start lobbying oppositional politicians for what they want. No, you deal with the government of America, not the opposition of the government of America. That seems like a reasonable thing to say.
He has a bone to pick specifically with the Democratic Party, and that goes all the way back to the 90s with Clinton. So he took over when Rabin was assassinated. Is that right? And then, so initially he was hesitant to pursue the Oslo Accords, implementing the Oslo Accords. And then he actually started to do it following a lot of pressure, and he paid a political price for that. He was actually voted out of office because the hardliners pushed him out. And so the lesson that he learned right there was like, just never give them an inch. And then he had personal beef with Bill Clinton, and he had personal beef with Barack Obama. We talked about this before, but the first phone call that Barack Obama made as president was to Mahmoud Abbas. And the first foreign policy priority he set was trying to get like a two-state solution. he called a press conference with Netanyahu within the first 2 months of his presidency. Obama did, and he used it to ambush Netanyahu and basically condemn him for the West Bank settlements. And Netanyahu never forgave him for that, never forgot, and he does not trust Democrats whatsoever.
Before we hang on 1 second, so chat's asking about the Fox interview. I promise you, we're going till 9. We will cover the Fox interview when we're going to wrap this up here in just a second. The Fox interview will be covered. We got some other election issues to deal with as well. But yeah, I just want to say, I guess in conclusion for me, I'm with Econoboy on this, where it's interesting. Netanyahu's impertinence really triggers a sense of American chauvinism in me that I thought I didn't have, which is, the president of the United States is the most powerful person on earth. Benjamin Netanyahu is not. And the seeming smug disregard Netanyahu has for Biden really triggers me. And I do think and Biden, of course, now has a reputation of being a cuck for Netanyahu. That should give Biden a sense of anxiety and shame. Like, man, I do come off like a fucking loser on this, to say nothing of the humanitarian concerns as well. So my hope is that Kamala wins the election and then acts in a way to really bring a decisive end to the humanitarian crisis, and also stick it to Netanyahu and remind him that as the prime minister of Israel, you are infinitely less powerful than the president of the United States. And that Bill Clinton quote, I'm thinking of who's the fucking superpower here.
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's not about, like, for me, it's not necessarily about American chauvinism or just feeling like we're the most important people in the room. It's just a matter of, like, it's just clear that Netanyahu is not dealing in good faith in any of these negotiations. Like, you can't participate in a negotiation and say, oh yeah, these are our demands, X, Y, and Z, back channel, clearly communicate your concerns, and then go running to my political opposition and say totally different things or harsher things, or make better deals with him, or try to negotiate directly with him. Again, it's just, you're not negotiating with the political opposition, right? And if anything, again, it's from an empathetic, sort of self-interested perspective from the Israeli people, I would want my leader to do things kind of like maybe Zelensky's doing, where, of course, it's totally reasonable to just try and have a good relationship no matter who ends up becoming the leader of a country.
Right.
That's totally reasonable. You see every country on the planet tries to, in general, have a good relationship with either the Republican or the Democrat who becomes president. Totally understandable.
Look at Volodymyr Zelensky, right? He met with both President Biden and Donald Trump the last time he was here in the United States.
Exactly. And that's totally reasonable, right? But what's not reasonable is to basically be lobbying opposition against stated government policy or against the negotiations you're having with the actual government. From the Israeli people's perspective, I wouldn't want my leader doing that, right? Like, you're playing a really high risk, high reward game here. And this is a game that's being played, obviously, with people's lives and people's humanitarian condition. It's not appropriate, right? And there's a really good reason to think that Netanyahu is not negotiating in good faith with anybody throughout this entire process, which, of course, is very frustrating. But anyway, I don't know if we want to talk much more about this.
No, that's fine. I think we can wrap this up. I almost called you Kyle, Hutch. Hutch, do you have anything else you want to add to close this loop on the Kyle Crystal conversation?
No, I look forward to the conversation. I'm going to do some more preparing for it tonight. And yeah, I think it's good because I feel like we don't really see a lot of those conversations. We see a lot of like intra-leftist fighting, but I don't know if I've seen them have conversations with like kind of normie libs like us, I guess you would say, or center-left libs. So I'm excited for that. I feel like those kind of conversations need to happen. So I'm sure. Yeah, it's going to be good.
Yeah, I'm excited for it as well. So a couple of things in chat as we focus now on politics and then ultimately conclude with the Brett Baer, Vice President Harris interview. Somebody said about 45,000 years ago, did you see Sitch and Adams' response to your Anna Kasparian stream? It was pretty bad. No, I did not, but you are welcome to link it. We would love to see it.
I did not say. I'll say what I said about Adam and Sitch weeks and weeks ago. I just don't really watch Adam and Sitch, so I'm not really sure what they're talking about on a daily basis.
Let's not get one guide by Adam and Sitch. I don't want to talk about him every
Yeah, no. So just
podcast.
send it to us, and we'll definitely check it out. But speaking of Anna Kasparian, I do want to play this 47-second clip because it's so funny.
I think I saw it.
Yeah. Well, at first I want to make sure. Can you all hear the audio?
Okay.
Yep.
Look,
You can?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay. Look, I don't know how anyone else feels. I'm only speaking for myself. I regret not reporting on the Hunter Biden laptop story in 2020 because I, like everyone else, was a sucker and I fell for the lie that it was a Russian influence campaign and nothing more than that, and you shouldn't draw any attention to it. Did anyone really think that the Hunter Biden laptop story was going to convince Biden supporters to stop supporting Biden?
No, but Anna, you're remembering wrong. We did report on it. We had long conversations about whether it was real or not real, and Rudy Giuliani had dropped it off at the
We
place.
did report on it, right? But I
and
guess
the guy that did the found the laptop was blind, and we were kidding around.
we
about
did.
it.
We did. Thank you for mentioning that. I had actually forgotten about
They're
that.
literally gaslighting
Okay.
themselves. This is insane.
No, I was gonna say. So there's a guy who follows me on Twitter. He has a pretty big account actually called Chad Not Chud, and I linked his tweet in the private chat here. The tweet is,
I'll bring it up. Hang on one second.
Okay, sure. As Josiah's bringing that up, the tweet is fascinating psychology on display here. Like you're watching a political narrative overwrite someone's own memory. Like she has, and this really is what it feels like. I'm not trying to be condescending. I have watched TYT for literally a decade and a half. Okay, since I was 12 years old, a very long time. What it seems like is Anna is slowly on that path to being captured by like these ultimately anti-establishment, ultimately skeptical opinions on things where it's like, oh, nobody reported on the Hunter Biden story and I'm a journalist and we didn't even report on it. But it's like, but wait, Anna, you did report on it. There must have been dozens of TYT videos back in 2020 about this very topic. And what it just feels like she's being captured by this just narrative, basically, that there's this sort of establishment sort of toxicity in our politics, this sort of institutional capture, centrist institutional capture, and it is a bizarre thing to witness in real time. It's a very bizarre thing to witness in real time.
For creators, it's really important to keep yourself tethered to reality outside of the online space. And I've, at the risk of sounding a bit hypocritical, she strikes me as someone who's way too online. And I feel like when you're way too online and you sort of succumb to the whims of the mob, as it were, then you just kind of lose touch with reality. And you're prone to audience capture. And you just you need to have like a strong personal life outside of all this. If you don't, you're really at a disadvantage, I think.
Well, it's weird because how do we square that with Anna's own statement in her, politically unaffiliated whatever thing, where she says, I recognize this is a small group. Like I recognize this is a small proportion of the left, but I'm still reacting so strongly to it. Like
I don't want to pick on him too much because I'm grateful for his political journey. But when I first joined Destiny's community, when I first interacted with him, this was the recurring tension that we had, which was he spent as much, and he'll admit to it now. He's admitted to it multiple times. He spent as much, if not more, time attacking the left than the right. Even though when you got down to brass tacks, he'd admit that the online left is, number one, effectively powerless, and number two, it represents a fringe of the overall, liberal left coalition. And it's just that he didn't feel it emotionally because this was in his space. So, seeing Hassan or somebody on the left say something cringe triggered him more than what Marjorie Taylor Greene was also tweeting and also actually doing. And I can sympathize with this because I too went down that rabbit hole back in 2017. I was more concerned with what AOC was tweeting at the time as a freshman congresswoman than what the president of the United States, someone infinitely more powerful than a single congresswoman, was not only saying, but also doing. And it took a friend really snapping me out of that and saying, you're stepping over $1 for a penny or a nickel, and really putting it in perspective that there is no rational basis by which you should be more concerned with the online left than what's going on in the Republican Party. And that's true. And so I think she's just kind of like, not excusing it, because it is a choice and it's something that should be made fun of when anybody does it, myself or Destiny included. But it's a trap that people fall into. And I hope that somebody is able to, get through to her and say, hey, listen, Hunter Biden's laptop, and Pisco is like the world's foremost expert on that whole thing, so he can correct me here. But if I remember correctly, the link was suppressed for a day.
It was a day on Twitter, and it's a nothing burger. The whole thing's a nothing burger.
The link was suppressed for a day on Twitter, and people think that like one social media platform suppressing a link for one day, and so much time in discourse has been dedicated to this. It's like the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in American politics. It's extremely weird.
Well, go on, Pisco. What you were saying?
No, I agree with what Econoboy says. And I was just going to add, and I thought what Econoboy was saying earlier was Anna's statement. It contradicts itself in what we just heard, which is she says, "Who's going to change their vote because of what is on Hunter Biden's laptop?" Well, that's the point. That's why it's so ludicrous for you to act as though it's a big deal, because it was a nothing burger, and your own statement shows that it was a nothing burger because no misconduct by Joe Biden was evinced by what's on the laptop, and that was essentially conceded to by Garrett Ziegler in my conversation with him. This is the Trump staffer who promulgated the full contents of the laptop. When we had a debate about Joe Biden's, the implication of Joe Biden's corruption, he basically conceded, I'm not going to be talking about the laptop that much because there's nothing in there that really implicates Joe Biden. I'm sure he wouldn't characterize it that way, but he said, we're not going to be talking a lot about the Hunter Biden laptop for that very reason, because none of that stuff is relevant to the election issues. And so it's mind-boggling for her to characterize this as a big deal. And of course, the quote unquote censorship of it as a big deal when nothing is being made of what's going on right now. And the fact that it was turned around in a day, as we said. But then finally, there is a Russian component to it. Absolutely. There is a Russian component to it. And that link is evinced by the indictment of Alexander Smirnov, the DOJ investigations that were funneled to by Giuliani and started by Donald Trump and pushed for by Trump, and that whole corruption, the phone call to Zelensky, all revolved around these allegations. And so there absolutely is a Russian angle here. And I have absolutely nothing but respect for the 51 or so former intel agencies members who came out and said this has the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, and
which it did.
It absolutely did. And we now know that the story that was being pushed and the narrative that was being pushed by Russia coincided with the narrative that was pushed by Trump. And so that angle there is absolutely true, lucid. And of course, I would debate Anna on this any day of the week. She'd get crushed because she just doesn't have a command of the facts. I'm not impressed with her writing or with her commentary. I don't think that she's really steeped in these issues.
Well, the conservatives like to point to, there's some poll that took place. I don't know what, some pollster went and asked people, if you would have known about the contents of the laptop, would you have voted for Biden? They claim that, I don't know, upwards of 20% of people would have changed their minds. But it's a stupid poll question, and if you frame it that way, then people just assume something nefarious.
Well, and I remember,
like Pisco said, the reality is that there was nothing in there that implicated Joe Biden with any of his kids' business dealings.
There's also a good fact check on that poll too, because people are obviously really vague about the poll they cite. But basically, the breakdown of the respondents would indicate that the majority of the people, based on the answer, were Republicans. So wait, are you saying knowing more about the Hunter Biden laptop would have made you change your vote from Trump to Biden because it's so base that his son is, has a 9-inch dick and he's, fucking people left, right, and center? Like, that's the thing. They read the top line, but don't go into the methodology and the breakdown in terms of like the respondent configuration. And so there's a really good fact check article, which I'll link you guys, that way you have it in your back pocket.
Shout out to IRI in the chat.
IRI, that's a real one.
Yes, it is. Yeah, yes, he is. It is. He is. Sorry about that, IRI. I just totally objectified you.
Damn.
Good to see you, buddy.
We're doing neo pronouns.
Exactly. So let's see here. A couple of other things in chat.
1 second.
There's a guy named Matt Campos who's in chat. 6 months into Biden's presidency, the U.S. started purchasing oil from Russia, up 20%. Why is it that's not a coincidence? Gas went up almost double when Biden got into office. Conaboy, do Do you have any recollection about the gas price situation? Because what I remember was President Biden approved oil production permits at a higher rate than the Trump administration did. They're just the oil executives at the time were not particularly keen on acting on the permits themselves. Biden can't force energy producers like Exxon and others to drill. They were getting a pretty fat profit margin at the time, if I remember correctly. And then they were taking the profits and putting them back into was it shareholder was it shareholder? So they weren't reinvesting in like oil rigs and actually the actual production itself.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very bizarre criticism. I mean, especially because we have to understand who Biden is. Biden is not some radical, sort of pro-environmentalist or something like that, right? What Biden did was when he started office, he paused new oil leases for, I think it was a period of 90 days or something like this.
And on federal land, which also constitutes the smallest
on
portion.
federal land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most frackable and drillable, just to be very clear about this, land belongs to states and also private owners. Federal land is the minority. Sorry.
Yeah, and people take this to be the reason why gas prices skyrocketed. Of course, that's not the entire story. A lot of it has to do with other geopolitical factors. I mean, you can look at oil production today. I mean, oil production today is higher than it was under the Trump administration. We wouldn't say that Trump was some rabid environmentalist who was stopping oil from being produced. The U.S. has continued its energy independence under Biden. And again, what energy independence just means is that you're a net exporter of oil. So in theory, you're producing, this isn't really what it means, but like in theory, you're producing as much oil as you can, as you need in America, that you're exporting the rest abroad. And so the gas prices thing is a bit of an odd, it's really quite a bizarre criticism. And obviously, like Josiah, like you said, understanding the dynamics of these oil companies coming off of negative oil prices in the summer of 2020, where gas was like $1.50 a gallon because the whole economy basically collapsed from COVID. They had to cut, close headquarters, dividends got slashed. And so as soon as oil prices started ticking up, the first thing that these shareholders are going to want from their boards, who are going to want implemented by their management teams, is those dividends to go back up. Because what the hell, like now oil is $100 a barrel. We're not going to want you to go out and, do more risky sort of investments in all these other, on all these other platforms that we don't necessarily know will pay off and it'll take a while. We want dividends. And this has been the story of shareholders in oil for a long time, is like we've been through constant oil crises and dividends never get clawed back by shareholders. They just stay low or they only have marginal increases. We want substantial dividends because oil is at a record high. And that's basically what happened. I mean, if you have a problem with that, you have a problem with capitalism.
Energy prices are very volatile. President doesn't have control over it.
No wars under Trump. Americans had more money under Trump. Energy was cheaper. Housing, consumer goods, taxes, literally everything. Democrats are for the rich because they love the money printer. So we're actually in one fewer war under President Biden because it was Biden, not Trump, who ended the war in Afghanistan.
And he presided over the largest deficit in our country's history. If you're going to talk about printing money.
He also reduced drone strikes to a fraction of what they were under Trump. And we actually don't know the full scope of Trump drone strikes because he slashed DoD requirements with respect to its reporting. If you're referring to wars in Ukraine and Russia, the United States is not waging those wars. Those are separate wars. And if you are counting those wars, there were still wars going on in the world under Donald Trump. If I remember correctly.
In Ukraine.
Yes. And if I remember correctly, Iran attacked, was it a Syrian base and also
Saudi Arabia?
It was at Saudi Arabia, but they attacked. Americans were injured in an attack by Iran on either a Saudi Arabian or a Syrian base, if I remember correctly.
And he downplayed their injuries.
Right, exactly. So you're just wrong on the facts here. They said, by the way, that the Adam Sitch thing was from their episode today. So you guys will definitely have to check that out. Apparently they covered us today.
Cool. Can't wait.
Couple of other things in chat before we get to the Fox interview. And obviously, if you guys see anything, let me know.
I forgot to link my chat. My bad.
Yeah, it's okay. I only text you 40 times, you prick. It's cool.
It's true. It's true.
Cool. It's fine. Let's see. Someone said in chat, I saw this earlier, that when it comes to not to circle all the way back, but when it came to Gaza, you should just do the right thing and things will sort themselves out. And certainly, I think you can make a case that I just want to say with just politics in general. You want to make the case that you should just do the right thing regardless of what the outcome will be politically. I think there's a strong moral case to be made there. But politically, I do think it's ridiculous to say just do the right thing and you will be electorally and politically rewarded for the right thing, because I've never seen that. Quite frankly, if doing the right thing, certainly domestically, resulted in political landslides, the Republican Party, there would be no Republican in high office at the moment. So you look at what Biden was handed when he became president, the soft landing of this economy, the fact that we didn't lean into austerity politics and austerity economics the way that Larry Summers wanted us to do. You know, there was another round of stimulus. You know, the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve did this in a really progressive way, and voters don't care. As a matter of fact, I just want to say, and we can say this because we're not politicians, I do want to wag my finger at progressives in chat, particularly with regards to domestic policy. Between what Biden did with the economy, the National Labor Relations Board, Lena Khan as chair of the FTC, I need you guys to remember politicians are people and they want to get reelected. And if they do good things, if you're a progressive and they do progressive things, I would argue, I can't make you do it, but you are morally obligated to reward them with your goddamn vote, if for no other reason that if you don't, they're going to stop doing those things. They're not going to do the right thing just for the sake of doing the right thing. It's a transactional relationship. If you're a progressive and you want progressive policy and they give you a bit of progressive policy, you have to reward them with a bit of support. It's just, it's so frustrating sometimes to see some of the great stuff about this administration go totally under the radar. That's not to say that you can't criticize, you can't push for more. You praise them, you say, great job, Mr. President. And then a week later you say, okay, let's move on to the next thing. But these things are so transactional, and I'm really frustrated because like Sam Cedar gets it. I think Sam Cedar is a really good example of somebody who gets it. Mehdi Hassan is a good example of somebody who gets it. I don't think Brianna Joy Gray is. I don't think Cenk Uygur is. I don't think Ana Kasparian is. It's just really frustrating. So be more like Sam Cedar and Mehdi Hassan. Do not be like Brianna Joy Gray, Ana Kasparian, and people like that. So
let's get to the. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go. It's fine, Hunch.
No, I was going to say we should get to the interview, but say what you got to say, buddy. I want to hear it.
I was just going to say, I'm going to speak plainly. That's my goal, and I've already sort of alluded to it. But if you have real power, you have an obligation not to usher in the worst of all possible worlds. If Trump wins, and your rationale is you're going to hurt the Democrats, and they're going to know that in the future they're going to have to back Gaza, that's not going to be the message that's received by the Democratic Party. It's going to be a win for the Israel lobbies. It's going to be seen as a vindication of support for, unbridled support for Israel. And at this point in time, this is an issue that, like I said, would be a civil war for the Democrats, and would entail a major negative to the campaign in this moment in time. And unfortunately, and I hate to say this, I'm just being real with you, until Hamas, Hezbollah, these organizations moderate their slogans, or frankly, at this point, it's too tainted, they're not going to be able to be it's going to be an albatross hanging around the neck of the Palestinian cause. And this is someone who supports a two-state solution. I'm just telling you this. And the message that will be received by the powers that be will not be, we need to be less hawkish with Israel and less, and more support of the Palestinian cause. That will not be the message that's received. And so it's not a strategy that's going to produce the results that you want. And it's going to result in more suffering in Gaza. And I'm not telling you to, do what you want. It's your vote. But I'm just telling you, your aims, your goal of that message being received will not be the outcome.
Yep, agreed. All right, so let's take a look at some of this interview. So Vice President Harris walked into the Lion's Den today. She agreed to be interviewed by Bret Baier of Fox News. The only other thing I want to say before we play the clip, and I'll toss it over to you guys if you have anything you want to say as an intro, is Bret Baier is seen as kind of the last of the quote-unquote straight news guys at Fox. There was Shep Smith and Chris Wallace and Bret Baier. Shep Smith and Chris Wallace left. Bret Baier is still there.
Cavuto's pretty good.
Yeah, but he's Fox Business. I totally agree. But Bayer is their chief political correspondent or their chief political anchor. And I would actually say Cavuto's better than Bayer. I think Cavuto is much better than Bayer, and that's kind of what I was getting at. As a reminder, in the Dominion voting systems settlement or during discovery, we learned that Brett Baer, not just Tucker Carlson, not just Sean Hannity, not just Laura Ingraham, but Brett Baer in 2020 was so worried about losing viewership to OAN and Newsmax that he was corresponding to other talent and other executives, trying to get them to get the Fox News decision desk to pull the decision. They called Arizona for President Biden, and Brett Baer wanted them to walk that back so as to not piss off MAGA Republicans. So this guy is a hack, and as a proud hack, there's nothing wrong with it, but just be honest about what you are, and Brett Baer is not honest about that. So anybody want to add anything else before we get started?
Let's get into it. I think you said it right.
Tell pollsters all over the country and here in Pennsylvania that immigration is one of the key issues that they're looking at this election, and specifically the influx of illegal immigrants from more than 150 countries. How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Illegal
I'm
immigrants?
glad you raised the issue of immigration, because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So the Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy.
It's a garbage
lie.
lie.
From custody, awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure.
That's a skilled pivot right there.
The Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Because we're obviously not going to play the whole thing. There are a gazillion clips to play. That was 2 minutes of the first clip. And you can see right out the gate, this was going to be a hostile interview. And I want to be very clear. I don't have a problem with that. She's the second highest ranking person in the federal government. She's, running for office to be the most powerful person in the country. And I actually think, as you'll see, she does better as the interview goes on and the more adversarial it gets. Those prosecutorial instincts really kick in. But I heard Hutch object to a couple of things, and Pisco, I heard you say that it was a lie, what Brett Baer said. So can you do a quick fact check?
Yeah. So when I said it was a lie, I was referencing his comment about Remain in Mexico. It is true that the administration stopped Remain in Mexico. What's a lie and bullshit is the notion that, quote unquote, catch and release was stopped under Donald Trump. Catch and release is a term that is applied to the reality of time and space and limits on money. And the fact that despite the supposed mandatory language in the Immigration Nationality Act, which states that certain categories of immigrants have to be subject to mandatory detention, there has never in the history of the INA been sufficient resources to comply with that supposed, and I put supposed because there actually are legal disputes about that, mandatory provision. So it is a bullshit lie to state that they reinstituted catch and release. It's something that MAGA people love to say, and to emphasize Remain in Mexico, which was a complete ancillary policy that covered at its height, a couple tens of thousands of people, maybe 30, 40,000 people, when we're talking about a magnitude of influx of millions of people. And so I'm glad that she did not accept that framing. And what she was trying to do before she was rudely interrupted, and the viewers see that, is to say, if you want to solve the problem, it requires congressional action. You need to give money to people to do jobs. It's that simple.
Yeah, Hutch, so you also had some objections too?
No, that covers it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll also say Remain in Mexico, if I remember my history correctly, the Biden administration did want to rescind Remain in Mexico, but I think 6 months into the administration, a federal judge ordered that Remain in Mexico be reinstated before eventually it made its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said that the Biden administration could shut it down. And then after it was shut down, Mexico made it abundantly clear that they would not cooperate with Remain in Mexico if President Biden restored it. And I'll also say that when Remain in Mexico was imposed under the Trump administration, Trump still saw an increase in contacts at the southern border during his last, I think, 6 months in office.
Yes. Trafficking of drugs, guns, and human beings. And Donald Trump, but let me just finish.
6 Democrats voted against that bill.
Learned about that bill and told them to kill it because he preferred to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States.
Ooh, she looks poised, huh?
Games with the issue,
I hear you.
but actually is focused on fixing
6 Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million.
Because it was too left wing.
Look
at everyone we put up.
A lot of conservatives have a problem with it. These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise.
I mean, sorry, too right wing.
Gary, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill. Former President Clinton actually referred to Laken Riley Sunday campaigning for you in Georgia, saying if those men had been properly vetted, Laken Riley probably would not have been killed. So if it wouldn't have happened, this is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by you.
These motherfuckers only want to talk about violence against women when it's an illegal immigrant doing it.
You owe those families an apology.
Let me just say.
Do you owe them?
Yeah.
Can you imagine in any other context that a politician? So think about all the people who died under COVID on Trump's watch, when I think even most medical experts would suggest that he was not doing everything possible to maximize the response there.
No, Dr. Deborah Birx, to be very clear, just real quick on that point, one of his own top medical advisors during the Trump administration helping him manage COVID, Dr. Deborah Birx, said, as a matter of fact, after the first 100,000 deaths, she believes that the vast majority after the first 100,000 could have been prevented had the Trump administration made different choices.
And what about everybody who's died of fentanyl-related deaths since the possibility to pass this bipartisan immigration bill, which would have absolutely helped in retrieving and stopping foreign fentanyl from coming, mostly by, I should say, Americans, but from being smuggled in? Would you be like, hey, these dead people who've died of fentanyl, do you take responsibility for their deaths, Donald Trump? Or how about everyone who's dying of gun violence by other Americans who, do you ever talk to someone from the NRA or from a Republican politician and say, hey, do you feel sorry? Do you owe an apology to these kids in these schools that were like shot to death by these vicious weapons? Put aside your questions about the Second Amendment, just like this kind of framing, obviously it's very combative, and I'm very happy with how the vice president answered it.
We're gonna play some of her response, but Hutch, you had some things to say?
Well, they only want to talk about violence against women when it's an illegal immigrant doing it. Like, if they want to have a conversation about violence against women, let's have, we tried to have a conversation about something like that during the Me Too movement, and the right wing largely tried to shut that entire conversation down and discredit it. So it's just, to me, it's just like naked racism. Early on in Trump's presidency, during his time in office, they originally had a plan to come out with a weekly report of violence done by illegal immigrants, and they quickly scrapped that idea. It's not that these things are not worth talking about, but it's obvious that they're exploiting this situation for political gain. They don't care about the issue broadly. If they did, they would want to focus on native-born Americans who, according to all the criminal data that we have from the FBI, commit crime at a lower rate than legal immigrants and illegal immigrants. Statistically speaking, if you live in a community of immigrants, you're going to be safer on average.
Yeah, I mean, by the same logic, we wouldn't have let in, the wave of Irish immigration or Italian immigration. I mean, how many stereotypes were there about Italians being mobsters and, running communities like this? And
with some
it's all,
truth behind it, just to be true, like that was
yeah,
Italian crime for sure.
exactly, right? Like sometimes immigrants commit violent crime. Like, of course that's true, right? But obviously it's also clear that throughout history there has not been I don't think, a genuine concern about the violence that immigrants enact, but there has been a lot of racism and discrimination against people from immigrant backgrounds. And again, the reason why an Italian American can be said to be a fourth, fifth generation American is because we largely ignored those types of ridiculous discriminatory pleas, because Italian Americans overall, they added to our society and provided many, many things that we love and enjoy today, if only the community that they provide to this country. I mean, we can say the same thing in the developing immigrant communities today, the Haitian community, the Mexican communities, Peruvian, Colombian, Venezuelan, Cuban, all these basically different Latin American and South Asian immigrants that are coming over. We can say the same thing about them as well today. In 50 years, hopefully I can say, grandson, we ignored all those ridiculous races back then. We live in a more vibrant society because of it. But we're in the short term in politics, and we have to sort of respond to kind of ridiculous fear mongering like this, which is pretty unfortunate.
A couple of things before we play. I'm going to give you a juxtaposition here of another clip that happened today before we get back to the vice president. Someone in chat said, then why was Trump able to pass all those executive orders to get border policy passed? So this is a conservative, by the way, who is constantly in Wick's channel too. So I recognize the username. So, and again, Pisco, this is your area of expertise. So correct me if I'm wrong, but many of Trump's own executive orders were shut down in federal court. They were struck down, which was one of the reasons why he also tried to lobby Congress to pass legislation to get his border-related aims achieved, because federal judges were striking down his EOs.
Yeah, obviously, because you can't solve this issue with executive action alone. They don't have the tools necessary to solve the issue. And Trump acknowledged this, and everyone acknowledged this. Everyone who's in this space has acknowledged that for decades, that we need a congressional solution and literal money to process all these cases. When you say Trump had border policies, did that stop the rise in illegal immigration? No. Did all of a sudden we have like a humongous decline in illegal immigration? No, we didn't. The numbers rose. Now they didn't rise as sharply, and there were some years in which they were like stagnant. But
it cratered during the pandemic because he was able to invoke emergency authorization, which gave him more authority. Yeah.
But think about this: the major policy initiatives, the Muslim quote unquote travel ban, we'll call it the travel ban. Did that stop illegal immigration? No. Did the money that they sequestered from the military, did that stop to build the wall? Did that stop illegal? No. The Rain in Mexico policy, that stopped illegal immigration at the huge levels? No. You're not seeing any significant decreases in illegal immigration over the course of tenure. Name one policy that produced it. You can't, because it's all imagination and it's all in your head. The reason we have so many people now is because of crises in their own country and because our asylum laws give people the right to have hearings. That's it.
Yeah, and as far as you being on my radar, again, certain stupid people stand out, and I believe we've interacted before where I've told you, since you are constantly in my replies seeking me out, either on Wick's channel or on mine, you are more than welcome to hit me up via email, a Discord DM, Twitter DM, and we can arrange time to have a conversation. So there you go. As far as juxtaposition, with all that in mind, Brett Baer asked the vice president, would you like to apologize for people who have died on your watch because of undocumented migrants? So I want you to keep that question in mind with how another Fox host reacted to Donald Trump making a joke about somebody who died. You could easily make the argument as a consequence of Trump's actions.
Amber Thurman's family have come out on a press call, and they're doing what's called a pre-buttal 2-hour town hall right now.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And I want to get
better ratings, I promise.
Oh my God.
Amber Thurman's family have come out.
So that was his response. Harris Faulkner laughed, and so did the Fox News viewership. So keep that in mind. Brett Baer seems to believe that Vice President Harris owes the family of Laken Riley an apology, but Donald Trump can mock the grieving family of a person who died as a consequence of Trump's justices striking down Roe v. Wade, and he constantly brags about that was him. He is happy about the decision, whereas Vice President Harris is not happy about the situation with the southern border, right? So again, just goes to show the very different standards that these two candidates are held to, and something as a long-term political project we really need to deal with. We're not going to be able to function as a country if one party is basically given carte blanche to be ghouls and the other party is held to the highest ethical standards.
Yeah, we need to be aggressive about
that.
that.
Those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election.
So
real quick, I just want to say
we're going to the other one.
On the topic of Fox News, they just came out with a poll that has Trump up 2 points nationally, but Kamala up 6 points in battleground states.
Well,
please,
Econoboy's wish might happen.
I just want that to be. Please let that be the only accurate poll. Please just give us an electoral college win and a popular vote loss. Just one time, I'm begging you.
It's not enough. We don't need just an electoral college win and a popular vote loss. We also need a trifecta government, despite that being the case like Trump got in 2016. That would be based, look, we're a constitutional republic, not a democracy. The polls have been schizophrenic these last 2 weeks.
Okay? They really have.
It has been crazy, the polls these last 2 weeks. Recent poll out, just quick thing, Dan Osborne up 6 points in Nebraska from an A+ rated pollster Survey USA. Unbelievable.
Independent, right?
Independent.
So on the topic of polls, I'm glad you brought that up, just because a lot of people ask me about polls, and I got to tell you, like, when you've been through a lot of elections, guys, in order to keep your sanity, throw the polls into the averages and go about your day. If you stress every single individual poll, your day to day is just going to be so volatile. Throw it into the averages, go about your day.
There's a lot of people that look back at what you said in 2019 when you first ran for president. And there have been changes, and you've talked about some of them. When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
Her demeanor is really strong. Like, she's impressive.
Of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So do you support that?
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law, and that is exactly what we will do.
So yeah, listen, I'll be the first to admit, like, there are parts of this interview that I don't think she handles well. But to be clear, I just don't think that anybody in that position would be able to handle well. Like,
she ran to the left in 2020. She thought that was the calculus at the time, that was going to be the thing to get her over the finish line, and the electorate shifted. And so, listen, as far as flip flops go, I'm not sure how many people care about this, but yeah.
But that's the issue
that I have. She can't answer because the American electorate is they're so hateful sometimes, and they're so blind sometimes, that the obvious answer, which is like, of course we support them having driver's license and having access to programs, because if we don't do that, they're going to be bigger drains on our society. Like, everyone complains that these immigrants, some who are in pending proceedings, some who, by the way, have a right to stay here, are drains on society. Well, one of the ways to make them not drains while they're pending proceedings is to give them mobility and give them working rights. And so any sane person would be like, I support them having driver's license because I don't want them to just be draining money. I want them to be productive members of society. And sometimes that means supporting them with the right to do certain things. But if you say that, people are going to be like, oh my God, you want to give $30,000 to spend on
right.
Like
the current electorate has shifted so far right on immigration during the Trump era. I think it's upwards of like 60% of people polled favor mass deportation. So, I mean, this is just a pendulum swing. Yeah. It will probably swing back to the left at some point, and she has to work within that framework.
I just kind of disagree with this. Like, I think that, look, at the end of the day, it's Kamala's fault for running to the left if she didn't genuinely feel those things. And I'm not. I mean, to be fair, she might genuinely feel those things, and she might not. She might not genuinely feel her current positions, right? So it's difficult to say when you flip flop like this. But I don't know. I kind of disagree.
Wait, it's not a flip flop. It's a dodge. That's different. This is
and hang on. I want to be clear too. Let's
nothing.
Wait.
What's the? If you're gonna say it's a flip flop, you need to find a contradiction, and I'll challenge you to find a contradiction in that position and what the position is now.
Well, I understand what you're saying on this specific issue she's dodging. Now, to be fair, I think that she has flip-flopped on some of her positions. Yes. Like, for instance, she used to support single-payer healthcare. She used to be an advocate for the Green New Deal, and she's advocated for more moderate approaches since then. But, like, that's not... I mean, fundamentally, the point is just that I actually do not know. I do not know, and I don't know if I agree with the idea that this like extreme moderation of her primary stances in 2020 is like an electorally like advantageous thing to do. It is, number one, not clear to me in the polling that independents prefer moderate policies. That's never been clear in any polling I've ever seen. Now, I take it on immigration. Hey, this might be a special case. We might be seeing a genuine realignment in this country. People might just be genuinely significantly more anti-immigrant than they used to be. But I don't know. I mean, you like Brett Baird just said. I mean, you see Democrats passing policies like these, even in deep blue and even in more moderately blue states, and it doesn't seem like they're electorally buried for doing it. And I don't know. I just don't know if you come out and say, "Hey, look," like Tim Walz did during his VP debate, come out and say, "Hey, look, we think immigrants, if they're going to be here because that's the law, and we've tried to advocate for changing that law, but if they're going to be here, they shouldn't be homeless and poor and destitute. We believe in taking care of all American citizens and people who come here. They should have basic access to government services. We shouldn't demonize them." I don't think that would be like a radically terrible thing for a candidate to come out as a position. So I don't know. I think she's being a little bit too timid here. That would be my...
I think that's good policy. I agree with that policy 100%. I also think that you have to anticipate what the right-wing media apparatus is going to do. If she takes that kind of a position in an interview like this, they will get the knives out and they will drive her unfavorable numbers on immigration up like 10, 15 points even more. So I do think you need to have some consideration of like the climate and the anticipated response from your adversaries. They'll pounce on her.
I understand that, but like they pounced on her for advocating for anti-price gouging laws and called her a Stalinist for doing that. Like a law that 44 out of 50 states already have enacted, including obviously red states. Like at a certain point, Trump is not constrained by the left-wing media apparatus, which runs wall-to-wall coverage about how he's a threat to women and democracy and poverty. That's what happens. Trump is not at all constrained. Now, that's not electorally advantageous. But what I'm saying, all that I'm saying is that Kamala doing the opposite of Trump by almost like hyper moderating her rhetoric on these issues, I don't know if that's electorally optimal either. Like, I think that there's probably a middle ground between like Trump's just not giving a fuck about it strategy and Kamala's just like very piddling. I mean, Tim Walz was interviewed the other day. He had to take back his stance that the electoral college. He had to take back his stance that the electoral college
on Fox. On Fox, when this had to be taken back,
If we're running so centrist as Democrats that we can't say that the electoral college could get taken away, I just think we're probably going a little bit too far.
Look, you might be right. I understand her instinct in this moment is all I'm saying, but you might be right. If I can make an example, the percentage of Americans that thought that government should be responsible for providing healthcare to Americans peaked around like 2006 at like 63%. And then what happens? Barack Obama is elected. He has a 60 vote threshold, albeit briefly, in the Senate. And there's an opportunity to do sweeping healthcare change. And what happened to those numbers? Now it dropped down to like 35, 40% after relentless assault from the right-wing media apparatus. So there are practical considerations in mind here.
There are, but I am curious because this is something where I wrestle with because, again, I want to be clear. I think that she did the best she could for a few reasons. Number one, the facts are what they are, which she did run to the left in 2019. Then she's trying to cover basically twice that distance in 2024 in the general election. Those are the facts. They have the receipts. And that's a very hard sell. To Pisco's point, I'm not saying that there aren't good answers to the question of would you support giving undocumented migrants or non-citizens driver's license. Clearly there are. But I also think that with all due respect to her, you know, and this doesn't mean she's a substandard candidate. It just means in this particular area, she's not the communicator Pete Buttigieg is. Pete Buttigieg could probably deliver the answer that Pisco's talking about.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that she
wasn't
could.
clear. I agree with you. What you just said, everything we just said, and I think Pete is a better communicator. But my point is being honest in this moment and leveling with the American people is at this point in time actually extremely difficult. I'm not sure how it would go. It's giving an honest answer would be like, oh, you want to give all these benefits to
right? No, because it would be weaponized and bad. But I just want to say, I just want to
exactly.
acknowledge that there are answers out there that probably could be given. But also, everything does have a risk. So you know, kind of this tangent going back and forth between Econoboy and Hutch, I think is really interesting because I take the point. This is something I rail against. If the standard is don't answer in such a way that Fox News can't weaponize it in bad faith, then she should just never talk because, and even that in and of itself can be weaponized in bad faith.
No, but this is a really salient issue. Like
immigration
is like.
I take your point, but to me, this is where I think Econoboy and I are on the same page. It's frustrating because it's like, does that mean she has to run to the right on every goddamn issue? That would be my question to you, Hutch, not in a non-adversarial way, because you know you sympathize with the instinct, but
not on every issue. She doesn't need to do it on every issue. But
what issue is there one that jumps out in mind where no, goddamn it, we're on the left, and fuck you if you disagree?
Yeah, I mean, her positions on like expanding the tax credit and stuff is totally in line with like what Biden was doing, or expanding ACA subsidies. Like, you can go to the left, you can expand on ACA. You're not going to pay any kind of political price for that, and your base will get excited for stuff like that. On immigration, it's just that this is according to every single poll their biggest vulnerability. So I'm saying that on this issue, you guys might be right. Honestly, you guys might be right, and I totally agree with you that if this was Pete Buttigieg, who is kind of a generational orator and he's getting scary better, then he might have been able to tackle this conversation in a way that might be able to break through to voters and change some minds. And she just wasn't up for that in this moment. I understand your frustration. I'm just saying I also understand the instinct on this one issue.
Well, and this is why
they are hammering her on.
No doubt. And this is why we're also allies, you know, in tomorrow's upcoming conversation. Because like I and I'm sure you feel the same way. I have enough humility to recognize a couple of things. There's a difference between, you know, a perfectly sound strategy and one that will be vindicated. You know, I always go the example of when we pulled out of Afghanistan. You know, people say, oh, we shouldn't have left Bagram Air Base. Well, there was actually sound reasons for why we did. In hindsight, maybe we should have done something different. That's part of the gamble of these things. And I usually get really concerned when people have a certitude about them. Like, no, she should definitely do X, Y, and Z. I understand why she's dodging this question. Just the whole fucking thing, to Econoboy's point, is incredibly frustrating. Anything else before we play this next clip? Cool.
Why do you think more people say they trust him on the economy than they trust you?
I think that when you look at an analysis of our plans for what we would do as President of the United States, it has been clear to those who study and understand how economic policy works that moving forward, because I do believe the American people are ready to turn the page on the divisiveness and the type of rhetoric that has come out of Donald Trump. People are ready to chart a new way forward, and they want a president who has a plan for the future and a plan that is sound and will strengthen our country. My plan for the economy does exactly that. His plan would be, again, to give tax cuts to billionaires and the biggest corporations in our country and blow up our deficit.
That was a good seat.
She has the fortunate position. She's in the fortunate position that there were just, 50 economists that just signed on 2 days ago saying that Donald Trump would run up the deficit twice as much as her or something, and he would cause more inflation. So she's got the wind at her sails on that.
Econoboy can speak to this, but wasn't it Moody's and Penn Wharton and a couple of other firms that came out?
It was all of them, Josiah.
Yeah.
Okay. It was all of them because, again, I mean, look, she said in the nicest possible way, people who know what they're talking about believe that my economic plan is better. That's essentially what she said. And That is, of course, correct, right? I mean, look, and it's not because they're institutionally captured establishment, neoliberal, neocon shills or whatever. Like, anyone who has studied economics, who has a detached view of economic institutions and policy tools related to the economy is going to tell you that to the extent that Kamala's economic plan is not good, it ain't as bad as Trump's, right? And obviously, there are many extents to which Kamala's policy plan is just positively a good thing. And we can't really say that about Donald Trump's economic policy plan. And I think that was a pretty good answer from Kamala overall.
I've got a couple more clips I want to play. We're going to do this one here where she's asked a question that she's been hammered on quite a bit here lately in terms of her response. And she has a different response to this question now.
Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership. I, for example, am someone who has not spent the majority of my career in Washington, D.C. I invite ideas, whether it be from the Republicans who are supporting me, who were just on stage with me minutes ago, and the business sector, and others who can contribute to the decisions that I make about, for example, my plan for increasing the supply of housing in America and bringing down the cost of housing, addressing the issue of small businesses, which is about working with the private sector to bring more capital and access to capital to our small business leaders, including my plan for a
Yeah, so I think that was a pretty good answer.
Yeah, no notes. I mean, it's weird because it seemed like in the past she was a little bit hesitant to basically just say like, yeah, like I'm not Joe Biden, I'm sure that I'll do some things differently. I think it would behoove her to just have maybe some examples. Like, for instance, like, hey, the Biden administration passed a temporary child tax credit. We saw that it worked, so I want to make it permanent. Like, it's like, hey, the Biden administration did some of a good thing. I want to do a lot of a good thing, right? Like something like that could make sense. But that was a really good answer.
That's a good way to frame it too, because you can frame it like you're springboarding off of a good Biden policy. So you're talking about your own plan while not putting down this president that you're currently serving.
Yeah. All right. Anything else before we play this 30-second clip?
Supposed to be a cakewalk.
So are they misguided, the 50%?
Listen,
are they stupid? What is
God,
it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within. Talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
We asked that question.
12 out of 10.
Yes,
12 out of 10.
We'll get to the follow-up to this because it's really important. It's arguably the highlight of the evening. But can we talk about this for just a second? So understand, he was asking her, given that you feel so intensely about Trump and nearly half the country support him, are they just stupid or confused? I have enormous issue with this question, but I want to throw it to you all first. What do you think about the question as well as her response?
Well, it's obviously a gotcha question, but she handled it perfectly. Yeah. That was just so good.
Yeah. It's a gotcha question, but it's outrageous that it's asked that, Kamala Harris is the one who's being accused of being belittling of the American people. It's honestly, it reminds me of the Hillary Clinton. What did she say? Deplorable thing.
Yeah. Basket of deplorables.
What were you going to say? Sorry. Go ahead.
No, she said basket of deplorables. Yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead, Econo.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I saw somebody say the other day, I don't know if this was a commentator or just somebody on Twitter or something. They talked about Gretchen Whitmer had that video where she puts a chip in that maybe it was an actress or something. Like, I don't honestly, I don't know what that was. It was a little bit weird even for me. But she released a statement afterwards apologizing because she said that some people inferred that she was making fun of Holy Communion. And it's like, Democrats, we need to just be willing to say things sometimes and just stick with them. Basket of deplorables, Hillary, she was right. Okay. There's a shitload of Trump supporters that are pieces of shit. Okay. She didn't say that.
We can say that. We can say that. Let she keep her hands clean, but we can say that.
But the thing is, though, like even Hillary with her basket of deplorables thing, it's like, but she was right? Like there's a lot of people that have this conspiratorial negative viewpoint. We can't just be tiptoeing around like every single thing that we say. I mean, people like genuineness. That's like the one reason why Trump has any favorability. He just says what he thinks, supposedly, right? That's
well,
like
think of the weird meme, right? That was so infectious. It went viral and people were taking up arms, metaphorically speaking, when, Tim Walz referred to MAGA Republicans as weird, and he was so general in his statements, was he referring to the politicians or the cultist supporters? If you asked him, he would probably say the politicians, but this is part of the reason why I go ham on the right as often as I do. And I have the privilege of doing it without being a politician who, to Hutch's point, has to be very careful about what they say. But the reason I took issue with the question wasn't even because it was a gotcha. If Brett Baer asked Donald Trump that question, I think it'd be a perfectly fair question. Like, hey, since we're going hard in the paint on one another, what does it say about the millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people who support the person that you're vilifying? My issue with Brett Baer is he would never ask that question of Donald Trump. He would never ask that question of Marjorie Taylor Greene. And this goes back to the double standard, which I'm sorry, I think all four of us and people in our position should wake up every day and make it a top 3 goal to whittle away at that double standard to the best that we're able. Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and elected MAGA Republicans say far more unhinged shit about Democrats than elected Democrats do about Republicans. They say more unhinged shit about blue cities, blue states,
Jewish voters. Donald Trump has repeatedly in recent times said any Jewish person that votes Democrat needs to get their head checked.
Yes.
Which is like orders of magnitude worse than Biden's "you ain't black" quote from 4 years ago.
And it's so funny you mentioned that, Hutch, because Jessica Tarlov and Martha McCallum on Fox today had a back and forth because Tarlov brought that up. Like, hey, listen, you want to talk about identity politics? Donald Trump, has said that Jewish people need to get their heads examined and that if he loses, it will be because of Jews. And Martha McCallum fired back just reflexively, frothing at the mouth. Well, didn't Biden say something like that, when he said you ain't black if you... And Jessica Tarlov had to say, Biden's not in this fucking election. And this is what I mean. This is where we have to make sure we communicate this. The Republicans are always worse. They just are. Even on this score, if this is something that bothers you, they're so condescending towards MAGA Republicans. You guys are fucking condescending towards Democrats, towards people who live in cities, in Maine, in Michigan, in California. And I'm sorry, if it's okay to talk shit, then you should get shit talked at you. And if you don't like it, shut your fucking mouth.
Trump
it is good, though, that Kamala held fire here. I agree with that tactic. I think that's good. Smart.
Trump called America a developing country.
Right. He says it's a developing nation. It's a nation in decline.
He said, look at Detroit.
Yes. While he was in Detroit.
Bro, like they came out with an ad and it ended so powerfully. I'm sure you guys saw the ad. Yeah. The ad ended with, he doesn't know a goddamn thing about Detroit. I was like, holy shit. It was so good.
It went hard.
Question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster.
Poor guy.
It's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So, Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within, that he is...
They fucking literally cut it off.
When he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect...
Get him.
The question that we asked him.
You didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy.
Ooh.
And in a democracy...
She nailed this.
The President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
Put it in an ad.
This is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of
She
America.
shut Brett up here.
It's quoted in the Bob Woodward book that way, yes.
No.
Chop that up, run that as an ad in every swing state aggressively. Oh,
Yeah.
just-
That was
Perfect.
by far, I think, her best moment. That was there towards the end. So obviously we got a lot to unpack with that. But before we do, just one last thing. Somebody says, equal fights, equal rights. Don't cry about it. Pandering. Again, I'm fine with you all talking shit about Democrats. It goes back to the Sitch and Adam thing. You can be as aggro as you want. That's fine. Just be able to take it in turn. And if you can't take it, shut the fuck up. It's that simple. Like, I just don't like the fragility of people who dish it out, which is MAGA. MAGA will talk mad shit about blue cities, blue states, Democrats, liberals, progressives, women, marginalized groups. It doesn't matter. They love to dish it out, but can't handle a fraction of it in turn. I just don't like the walking on eggshells thing. It's just that simple. It's cool.
Trump's own Secretary of Defense said that you should take his comments that he makes in this regard seriously, because he said that throughout the Trump administration, Trump repeatedly inquired about deploying the National Guard to quash civil unrest, about deploying the military, enacting martial law. And again, this is just one of those weird binds that Trump supporters are in. His own Secretary of Defense said he is serious when he is saying these things.
He's a rhino.
And yeah, it's like, look, I saw somebody really fucking comically own Sagar about this. It was one of his YouTube comments, actually, where Sagar and people like Sagar will say, I like Trump because he says what he means. He's a genuine guy. But then we have to enter into a fourth dimensional vortex to somehow interpret the things that he's saying in a favorable, moderate light, even when the people who are tasked with enacting his crazy plans, like his Secretary of Defense, say this is a genuine plan that he has. Like, it is just a bizarre game of pretend that we have to
he did it. He did it. There was a peaceful protest in DC during the BLM stuff, and he sent in riot police, and they fired pepper spray on they were not rioting. They were totally pleased. There were clergy members in the in that crowd, and he dispersed that crowd so he could go take a fucking selfie holding an upside down Bible outside of a burnt down church.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, what do you
the
guys
DMs
think?
keep showing up on my screen, so careful what you type there.
Do they really?
They can see everything.
Well, if you
be careful with that.
Yeah, I just got to link you guys this stuff, because maybe that'll be the thing we talk about next episode. Let's see here. No, I mean, listen, obviously that was a rough interview. There's no doubt about it. It was far from smooth by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that by definition, it was going to be like, I didn't expect, cakewalk. I also didn't expect Brett Baier to be an easy interviewer as well. I know some people, like Trump, for example, was freaking out on Truth Social. He was like, Brett Baier is going to give her a softball interview because he hates Trump. I knew that was obviously not going to be the case. Brett Baier is apparently not hard enough on the Democrats, such that even though he was supposed to be one of the moderators for that Fox News debate, Trump declined. But I think there towards the end, when it got more adversarial, she was in her element, and I think she closed out pretty strong. So do you think this is going to have any impact on the election or on polls?
Nah.
I mean, some marginal impact.
Maybe.
Small
I mean,
impact.
but this race is so static. It's just, you compare it to other races previously, and Romney versus Obama, Trump and Hillary, Trump and Biden, even Obama versus McCain. Every single election, there's it's so much volatility. Sometimes one candidate's up, the other. This race has just been so stable. I think 95% of the country has their vote locked in at this point.
There's just a lot of things about.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say to that question I actually just said, there's just a lot of things about this race that that are really big unknowns, right? So like in 2020, look, people voted before abortion got taken away and before Trump did, obviously, because the results had to be announced before Trump called the election stolen, did all of his crazy anti-democracy things. People voted before that happened. And so those are kind of two big lingering questions. And it could be why we're just not seeing as much movement. I mean, we might just literally be in just the most polarized environment that we've ever been in. But my feeling, look, I released my map the other day. I've got Kamala winning every swing state. I really think the polls are understating Kamala's support.
I'm with you.
Now look, that does not mean she's going to get 60% of the vote and it's going to be a 49 state landslide, a la Tim Pool. But like, I think to the extent that the polls show her aggregately basically tied with Biden, or basically tied with Trump, I think she's probably up like 2 or 3 points. I just think that she's going to win this election. And I think that the American people are going to, in some regards, definitively say, we do not want Trump. Look, I'll say this again. It's the most unbelievable poll that I've ever seen in this election cycle. Dan Osborne, just some guy who works at a machine shop, is polling +6 in Nebraska against Deb Fischer, the longtime incumbent Nebraska senator. Okay, now I think that speaks in part to some unique qualities that Dan Osborne has, but I think that also speaks to the general environment of apathy and a lack of enthusiasm on the Republican side. I could eat my words on this. My prediction might change in the next 2 to 3 weeks, but that is my sense of things. I'm unusually optimistic.
Another thing to consider here is that Donald Trump, both in 2016 and 2020, he got around 47% of the vote. And in both of those instances, the national aggregates were off by 3 to 5 points between the two races. He is polling right now right around 47%. So my sense of things is that the pollsters, whatever they did to adjust their methodology, they seem to be more. It's probably going to be more in line with the actual results. And again, based on recent history, the last 2.5 years, it's the Democrats over and over and over that keep overperforming. So I'm with you, Econo Boy. I'm bullish on all 7.
What about the Senate?
He's shaking his head.
What about
I'm
the Senate?
not bullish. I think it's a toss-up. I think it's
all right, but hang on. What about the Senate?
I think, look, Danny Osborne is going to take this one home for us. All right.
He's going to caucus with the Republicans, right?
No, he's not. He'd be stupid to do that. I'd kill myself if that happened. Okay. I believe in Dan Osborne.
Is he not running on that?
He has not committed to caucusing to either party.
I don't. My understanding is that in many regards, Dan Osborne is actually a true independent. Like, he's right leaning on some issues and left leaning on some issues, which means half the time he's right, whereas Deb Fischer's wrong 100% of the time. Okay, I'll take him over anybody else. But no, I honestly think. Look, I know people are really bearish on Jesus, how am I Tester in fucking Montana? But I don't know. I think that Tester has really strong fundamentals in the Montana race. I know that the polls aren't super favorable to him right now.
He raised $30 million.
I think the polls are genuinely underestimating Democrats, and the polls have been genuinely. Look, in this recent New Jersey special election, like a month ago, Democrats won by huge margins. Okay, and I'm not saying Tester doesn't have a fight on his hands, or Sherrod Brown, or these other guys. I'm just saying.
Those are low turnout races.
Well, sure, right, but at the same time, it's about general sentiment. Like, I think that the general sentiment right now, underlying in the polls, is a less enthusiastic Republican sentiment and a more enthusiastic Democratic sentiment. In Tester, you can compare Tester to Osborne. Like the Survey USA poll that had Osborne up 6 showed that Osborne was capturing about 25% of stated Republican voters, and he was doing much better with men on the same ballot that they polled Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, right? And I would just have to imagine that Tester probably has an easier time winning his race than Dan Osborne does, some random guy who worked at a machine shop, right? For God's sakes. So I'm just pretty optimistic, guys. I'm just pretty optimistic. I haven't quite called that race, but
there's also we've seen record registration for Black women in states all over the country and the polls might not be picking that up yet because
apparently there was record-breaking early voting turnout for Georgia.
Georgia. Yeah, they crushed the
Pisco, what is your But pull us back. Why are you not as optimistic?
He's a deeply
Listen,
cynical man.
I'm hopeful. I want Kamala Harris to win. I want Democrats to win all three. I think it's vital that Democrats win all three. I mean, that to me is like a goal that I want to be true. I think this election is super competitive. I think that the fundamentals overall favor a Republican candidate. And I think that the polls have been accurate. I don't agree that there's been these big overperformances by Democrats.
Wait, what do you mean?
I don't think that was true in 2022. I think that was
in Michigan. In Michigan, Whitmer was polling, I think, +3. She ends up winning by like 15 points.
Yeah, but I look on net, and on net, the polls are pretty accurate in 2022. And I mean, the polls in 2020 were off by more than the polls in 2022. And I just don't. I'm not here to tell you it can't happen. I want it to happen. I'm going to work to happen. You know, I'm going to be tweeting. I'm going to be, doing events.
I'm going to be 2022 though. It's not just 2022. There's been special elections over the last 2 years. All over the country.
Racist, Hutch.
Listen, there's some indicators that I think that they have some predictive value to them, but there are other indicators that I think bode well for Republicans. I think that if Kamala Harris can get her share of the black vote up to like the high 80s, I think she's in a really good position, and I would be incredibly bullish. I think that if it's true, I forget who said it actually, that they're undercounting or there's some systemic error in the polling, that they're not properly counting some segment of the black vote, then that bodes very well for Kamala Harris. If she's able to do that, I think she wins, but she has to do that, and I think that it could be. She might not.
I bet $500 today. I got 500 on it.
I think that the technical reason why I think that the polls are understating Republican support is because my understanding of polling is that they'll try to weight sort of demographically the responses, because you'll poll 1,000 people and it might not be a representative sample. So depending on the demographics of who's polled, they'll re-weight basically their responses, and that's how they'll weight the responses that they get from their samples in order to reflect what actual national or statewide opinion is, right? And my understanding of what pollsters have done to try and account basically for these polling errors in 2020 and in 2016 in response to Donald Trump winning or doing a lot better than he otherwise would, we thought he was going to do in 2020, was that they started weighting sort of less than sticky voters in favor of Trump. People like, your non-college educated whites, these people really came out in support of Trump. We weren't really expecting them to turn out as strongly in those numbers. However, I think that that's probabilistically a mistake in this race, because non-sticky voters are exactly that. They're not very sticky. They're not likely to vote. And I think that especially in this 2024 race, when you see the enthusiasm on both sides, I think that because Democrats seem to have an enthusiasm advantage, certainly that it seems that is the case, I think that this race will be lower turnout. And Democrats have seen a transformation that they're stickier voters than Republicans nowadays. That's why Democrats do better in likely voter polls nowadays. And so the fact that polls are overweighting less than sticky voters that they assume are going to come out and support Trump this time, at the same time that we've seen a vibe shift, that's just why I generally think that Democrats have overperformed in 2022, and I think that's why they're going to overperform in 2024. I could be wrong. That could be ridiculous.
We need to talk about the polls themselves. It is objectively a fact. It's not cope. It's objectively a fact that like 40% of the polls that are being tossed in the aggregates right now are from right-wing aligned pollsters. This is not something that is disputed.
And we need to talk about the keys.
So listen, speaking of that guy was interviewed, Professor Lichtman was interviewed by Destiny. I'm sorry you weren't able to participate in that piece, but listen, we are 13 minutes past the hour.
Oh,
wow. Hutch and I have a conversation to prepare for tomorrow.
True.
Yeah, and a bunch of more videos on my end, but listen, this was fun. We will do it again next week. It's next Wednesday. And this election is rapidly approaching. So if you're an eligible voter, please make sure you're
hold on to your
registered. Please make sure you have a plan to vote, and let's go save democracy. Trifecta. Again, remember, it's not enough to just have Kamala in the White House. We need all three, because if she becomes president and we get a Republican Senate, they will not confirm any of her Supreme Court nominees. They may not even confirm any of her executive appointments. You cannot trust this Republican Party at all. So appreciate it. Appreciate chat. Appreciate you three co-hosts, and we'll see you next Wednesday.